Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar hosted by Keyfactor, FreeWave, and NetFoundry on Zero Trust Revolution, IoT, OT, risks in this connected industry. I've got a great set of colleagues on the line here with me. We've got a couple of slides we're going to go through for background. We have stories, we have a few polls, so I'm really looking forward to the next 45 minutes. If you have questions from the audience, please use the Bright Talk tool, drop your question in there under the question mark area, and we will try to get to them as we go along. Although I believe we have done a lot of preparation to hopefully answer a lot of the things that you might be wondering and wanting to learn about today. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Mike to go through introductions for himself, a little bit about him, a little bit about his company, just so you know who you were talking to. Then we'll go to Andrew, and then I'll wrap it up, and then we'll sort of dive into our content. Thank you. So go ahead, Mike.
And welcome, everyone. So my name is Mike Kochanik. I am a co-founder of NetFoundry, and NetFoundry is a software-only platform that allows customers to build a very agile kind of overlay network on top of any underlay, right? And fundamentally, our developers in the world are using this to embed zero trust directly into applications and products. In fact, we're going to be talking about such a product here today between the three companies on this presentation, right? And then enterprises use us for any form of universal zero trust networking cases, spanning microsegmentation to agentic AI. Go for it, Ellen. And you can click for it. And it manifests itself like this, right? When we deploy our networks, we deploy an overlay network on top of any underlay. That overlay network has a control plane and a data plane. Edges are outbound only connected into that globally distributed fabric to provide the connectivity. And then we create governance and security policy on top of that, saying what identities and services can actually communicate with each other. All of this can be deployed in the cloud, hybrid, or completely on-premise, okay? And we provide, in terms of this relationship here today of the three companies on the phone, we provide the connectivity fabric that allows for these OT networks to communicate securely. Okay.
Thank you, Mike. All right, Andrew, I'd like to hand it over to you for an introduction.
Sure. My name is Andrew Livingston. I'm a senior sales engineer here at FreeWave. I've been in the cyber industry now for just over a decade. I've spent 22 years in the Air Force. I have knowledge and best practices around cybersecurity, strategic implementation of things like AI, machine learning, and all things cybersecurity, XDRs, MDRs, and security operations centers. What we do here at FreeWave, we've been in the industry for 30 plus years. We have a real rugged, remote critical infrastructure, so we help protect all that. And what we're going to talk about today is how we implement what we call our invisible security with zero trust best in practice. We help connect mission critical assets across really hard to reach industrial environments, and we focus on security. And we want to have security and connectivity by design. And what we're going to do here is showcase how we bridge all of the connectivity, the control, identity, all with zero trust and best practice.
Awesome. Well, thank you and welcome. And to round it out, my name is Ellen Boehm, and I'm from Keyfactor, which is a cybersecurity software company that's really focused around certificates and certificate automation and code signing, firmware signing, but all of those products and pieces come together to create a foundation for digital trust. So as more and more devices, workloads, and now even AI agents are emerging in our enterprises, in our connected devices, and in our operations, we have to make sure that we can trust all these connected pieces. So our company focuses in three key pillars. One is to be able to understand and have visibility of all of the cryptographic assets that live within your operation. So that could be keys or tokens. Oftentimes, maybe were issued and then forgotten about. All of those can, need to be discovered and brought into visibility in your organization. Trust in the middle piece is about issuing digital identities, to devices so that you, again, can know who is allowed to connect and who's authorized to be able to talk and use these systems. And then lastly is the ongoing management and life cycle of these. So similar to how our passports or our driver's licenses don't last for our full life, there is a validity period. That is the same thing that we're talking about here. And we're seeing shortening validity periods as a best practice, because the more frequently you're updating these digital pieces, the less likely they're able to be attacked. So just a little bit about what our company does. I lead IoT, and also I've been studying the agentic AI market, and also how we are helping to secure a bunch of different identities across connected devices, from what we're going to talk about today to embedded medical devices, all the way through the traditional devices that live within your enterprise. So with that background, now you know a little bit more about us. Mike, I would like to hand it over to you. We have this one page for the audience to see sort of how we fit together and how we solve a problem. So can you just walk us through?
Sure. Thank you, Ellen. This kind of simplified overview represents the three companies essentially packaging a solution, right? A solution that can be deployed in the field, turned on, and immediately provide value to the customer without having to build things like bespoke VPNs or SD-WANs, without having to try to run your own certificate authority, without having to try to manage machine identities in the markets. It's completely packaged, kind of an all batteries included solution, if you will. It is sold by FreeWave. It is sold as Zentry. That is the branded name of it. You can kind of guess at what that might mean, right? Zero trust entry. And then, as Andrew alluded to earlier, we also have ruggedized hardware involved here, so that when these systems are deployed into the field, they are ready to go. This is something that will dramatically decrease the time for deployment, but also simplicity increases security, right? We all know that complexity is the enemy of security. So when we look at this solution, it really brings together three major pillars of any OT solution, right? The first is underlay, right? FreeWave is world renowned at being able to deploy private 5G networks, satellite communications, all of that, right? So when we look at things like a distributed energy grid, when we look at things like an oil field with multiple different oil wellheads across the field, things along those lines, most likely we're going to deploy a private 5G network. So embedded in this system is an eSIM capability that allows us to work with any of the wireless providers wherever it's deployed worldwide. NetFoundry then comes into this model in partnership with Keyfactor, because everything we do is identity driven, right? Identity is really the first step in controlling security. So we leverage all of Keyfactor's unique identifiers to really hard code, if you will, machine identity in this model, right? They become immutable identities, right? And then lastly, NetFoundry provides the overlay network, which really allows you to carve up the underlay into as many overlay networks as you see fit, right? Microsegmentation is a key factor of play on words, key factor of industrial security, right? If we look at the standards in the industry, right? So this is how it plays out. So on one end here, we have possibly a consultant looking to access a machine inside a manufacturing facility. We can provide unique identity on both sides of this, mutual TLS with X509 certificates, to uniquely allow that consultant to access that singular machine within that factory setting or within that oil field or whatever the OT environment is, right? So that's how all three of us come together. But I think what's really critical here is this is a tested, proven environment designed to be deployed in the hundreds, if not thousands of edges, right? So when you start to deploy this across, distributed energy grid sites, for example, you're going to be able to light up those sites with confidence because this has been brought together, validated, and tested by three of the leaders in the industry. So Ellen, I think that gives a pretty decent overview of what the companies are doing together, and I'll pass.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for pulling it all together. I think that's helpful to walk through. And also, just to be frank, there's not one vendor that's going to provide you the security solutions that you need for your entire environment. So it's very much an ecosystem where we each are playing a role, but coming together and packaging something like this to make it easier for you to adopt and then securely be able to trust these connected systems you're bringing into your factory or bringing into your operations is really important. Okay, so let's get into a couple more data points. So there is a market study here that's talking about growth of industrial control systems. So Mike, I think also this was something you wanted to add to the conversation to sort of start us off. So can you describe a little bit more about what you learned here?
Sure. So this essentially, I want to set a little context, right? And I think it's important that we recognize a context for why we have a security problem at all, right? If you look over the last 30 years, just take a minute and think about the innovation that has happened in compute, right? We could talk about cloud services, we can talk about edge compute, we could talk about all of those types of innovations, right? If we look at applications, look at all the innovation in application, right? All the new languages, Rust, Go, right? All the new ways of deploying applications, Docker, right? Kubernetes. Significant amount of innovation has happened over the last 30 years. And we actually have to ask ourselves, what about the network, right? Has the network truly evolved to keep pace from an innovation perspective? And I think we need to recognize that, look, we're still using VPNs. The first VPN was introduced almost 30 years ago. We're still whitelisting and blacklisting IP addresses, right? Why are we talking about IP addresses in this day and age when we have all of this modern innovation happening at the application layer? And to add to that context now, agentic AI at the edge, and all the things that are going to really press us for what moves forward. So the bottom line with this slide is the network simply hasn't kept up with the new world. There's a quote from JP Morgan Chase about how we need to build secure by design products. And that's what you have here with Zentry, right? And FreeWave and Keyfactor. You have a solution that is secure by design because it was designed that way. And fundamentally, at the end of the day, only software can keep up with software. So that's kind of the first level of the context. Ellen, if we go to the next level, and then we look at the problem space, right? This is a recent bit site trace report, just came out September 2025. And the fact of the matter is, we started with over 160,000 exposed IPs, right? That represents kind of the putting a sign out in the yard saying, please hack here, right? If you want to think about it that way.
Yeah.
And it's growing, substantially just by the end of the year, right? I mean, we don't see this tailing off. I mean, this is a problem space that if you were to try to ask yourself, well, what's the one thing I can do tomorrow morning and improve my security posture? Well, start with this. Take your OT infrastructure dark, completely dark, no open inbound ports, right? And that's really what this is all about. And this report was properly titled, The Unforgivable Exposure of ICS-OT. And if you read the report, which we'll make available, it's public, I think you'll gain a lot of insight into this. So on one hand, we have networks not keeping pace with innovation. On the other hand, we have open IP addresses with with a continuum that says there are going to be more of them. Add agentic AI onto the problem space, and that's like gasoline on the fire, basically. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that gives us a little context as we set up into the conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you for finding those and sharing them with the crowd. It's always good to have some statistics and research that's not only just us saying these things. This is the market, this is reality. I was at a manufacturing show a few weeks ago, and this is a hot topic. And there's multiple layers to it. I think from an attack surface standpoint, you make a good point here. As the more and more devices are increasing, at the same time, attackers are becoming more savvy, and they are going to find the weakest link into the network. They are going to find that one device that is not secured, that maybe someone didn't think was super important because maybe it's only, it's maybe some camera or a type of sensor, But if you don't have visibility into that as an operational leader, that could be a way into your network and something can go down. So there's a lot of impacts that can come from this. So thank you. With that, Andrew, I do want to pull you into the conversation. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the risks. So we kind of hinted here at what the impacts of breaches can so can you tell us a little bit more stories about what happens when some of these environments do get hacked into or breached, and how do we quantify the impacts of that?
Sure. I want to tie it back kind of to the status quo slide. We're looking at 200,000 plus ICS devices that are publicly accessible online. And I love what you said, Mike, because it does scream, attack me here. And the reason this is happening is exposures are not intentional. We didn't put these devices out to be hacked. And really what happened is that technology boom. So the legacy OT was built for isolation, not exposure. And I think through COVID, we saw exposure just go through the roof with things like remote workforce. And modernization does expand that attack surface with specifically things like that. So secure connectivity, zero trust architecture, these are things that have been preached for a long time. The problem is, how do you enable modernization without exposure, right? That takes a lot of time and a lot of money. And when we're looking at the OT cybersecurity landscape today, there are a lot of risk factors out there. And when we look at studies like the IBM security, research on this one, the average OT breach cost is something around $830,000 in 2024 per incident, which means that you're looking at like $5 million per incident. This is great because the downtime for this is 199 days. And when you talk about this really puts it in perspective of how we need to expand the modernization and put in tools and technologies that can just make your entire architecture invisible. They also go on to say that containment is 73 days. And now we can quantify these with dollar amounts. This is very easy to do. A quick calculation can put these up to $125,000 per hour. I mean, these are staggering costs. And so when we're looking at these breaches, they don't just affect production, they affect operations as well. Okay? We want to look at things like safety and compliance. It's not all just data. So really at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to do prevention early, we want early detection, and we need automation to protect the uptime, especially around the critical infrastructure. And this is why OT is such a target for bad guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So you threw out a lot of good points there, especially some of those numbers around what a company would have to spend, whether it's lost business, lost production, or if it is a safety risk to a person, someone's harmed. I mean, these are real numbers here. So how do we take, and this is a question I'm just kind of riffing off of what you said, how do we take those numbers that say this is what the cost of these things, and then be able to have organizations invest in security from the start, invest in security by design? How do we get them to that stage and say, hey, if you do these things up front, you're going to be preventing these costly impacts? So I think we'll get into that in a little bit more, I think, but that's the question that we're here to answer. How do you maybe start with this sort of zero trust mindset, and then not just wait for one of these bad things to happen, and then all of a sudden you're losing business and losing money? So yeah, let's answer that a little bit. Andrew, maybe another question, typical causes of these breaches. So, there's again, people, there's maybe AI risks. Can you just break a little bit more down into what is causing these things actually?
Sure. So what we see across the industry, and there's a lot of different statistics out there, but on average, what you're looking at is roughly about 47% of attacks are malicious. So this is your credential theft, your ransomware, your lateral movements. But the other half of that 53%, when you're looking at these across the board, statistically points to misconfigurations, weak passwords, unpatched assets, really human error and system error. And we see this because, and I think we can all agree across the board, that we just don't have a lot of assets to throw at these, especially human bodies. Typically your IT team is 5-6 people, and those dedicated to cybersecurity is less than one person. Mm-hmm. And so we have these legacy firewall rules and legacy passwords, and so they do go unpatched, and this is a big problem here. And so visibility and identity are really that core challenge around your infrastructures. And this is why we've heard this for what, 20 years, that zero trust mindset. But now putting that in practice right away by Secure by Design allows us to do more with less. It allows every connection, every device, and all the data flow to be continuously verified. And so this is critical to the breaches and stopping things like system errors and human error.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. You know, that's a great tee up to a poll question that I want to ask the crowd. So I'm going to try to see if this comes up here on everyone's screen. So I just click start poll. So hopefully you all can see that. The question is, guess the percentage of attacks that are caused by credential abuse. So a little bit about what Andrew was mentioning there. So what percentage of attacks are caused by credential abuse? So I'll maybe just give you 15 seconds or so to sort of guess, and then Andrew, I'll hand it over to you to actually reveal the answer here. We'll see if the crowd can answer correctly. So after we close this out, we're going to shift into another section where we're going to talk a little bit more about challenges to implementing this best practice security that we've sort of been hinting at. So there's a bunch of different dynamics that we know and our customers deal with, and so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Okay, see the answers coming in here. All right, so I'm going to end the poll, and the results that I can see here, we've got 60% of our audience believes that the percent of attacks caused by credential abuse is over 75%. Okay, so most people believe it's really high. And then we've got about, the split between less than 20% and 20 to 49%. So Andrew, really, what is it? What percent are caused by credential abuse?
Yeah, so we're looking at 30%. However, it is growing 71% year after year, according to different surveys and IBM's X-Force. So it's a pretty staggering answer on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, it's something that when we see those trends, especially 71% growing year over year, that could become more and more of a problem. Okay, so let's talk about some challenges and things that we have seen working with clients. So first, want to talk about the dynamic landscape that we have when we have global manufacturing. So many of our customers, and Mike, I think you can comment on this too, have global manufacturing for whether it's supply chains of different components that need to all come together to make a full solution, or it's distributing manufacturing, just costs across different regions to be able to service in region. And so there's a lot of connectivity that needs to be secured between these different sites, whether it's your ordering management system, whether it's financial systems, or whether it's really the operations themselves. So this is a problem that manufacturers face constantly. So I think it's being able to have an oversight into all the operations that you have, the factories that you have, and when it comes to being able to secure those pieces. We mentioned remote access. That's more and more common to be able to, you have to have visibility, and you have to be able to authenticate the people that are allowed to get in to remotely view these systems and the data that's coming out of them to make sure that your operations remain up and remain secure. So that's one piece that we've seen. Mike, do you have any other comments about sort of global manufacturing challenges you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, tying up to one of Andrew's comments, modernization, right? It's really about business agility, right? And there are regulations coming, right? 62443 and the Cyber Resiliency Act, which basically have mandates in them for things like microsegmentation and proving that your solutions are secure by design, attesting to it. But when we really think about it, whether we're talking about a global manufacturing scenario, or we're talking about energy, gas, oil, utilities, we're faced with a pretty significant distribution problem, right? We have global manufacturing sites around the world, for example, or multiple different oil fields, mining operations around the world, right? And you need to realize, and I think I'm fairly safe in making this comment, that behind the first firewall, almost all of these networks are fairly flat, right? The objective of achieving microsegmentation to prevent lateral movement in the networks is really still kind of a windmill that we're chasing, so to speak, right? Combine that with the regulatory pressure to document, demonstrate, attest to what you're doing. And then businesses have the objectives of things like digital twins and predictive maintenance, right? Third-party access requirements, and to be honest, when you look inside of these environments, many organizations don't know what to microsegment in the first place. Like what identities have access to what systems. As Andrew pointed out, we're still, in most organizations, maybe still managing IP address rules with spreadsheets, things like that, right? IP firewalls, right? And really, you need there's no singular answer out there, but you need an approach where you can evolve your systems without ripping up your underlays, right? So when you look at the Zentry offering here, we tell our customers, you don't have to touch your underlay, right? Leave your underlay as it is. Deploy software-based overlay networks on top of it. Shut down all your inbound ports. We talked about 200,000 IP addresses exposed, right? What a significant reduction in threat exposure just by doing that. And then begin to microsegment your networks to, have lateral movement threats reduced, right? Tie hard, identity to these systems, and then provide all the telemetry you need to really understand who's accessing what, and tie that up with systems that can help you process it, whether it's a discovery engine or it's an AI agentic type tool, things along those lines, right? So when we look at use cases, so to speak, they all have the same characteristics that I just described, right? Whether it's energy, utilities, maybe the regulatory environments are even more stringent in some cases. But how do we make progress on that? And I think we can take an approach here where, you start doing things like, all right, let's get the networks dark. Let's begin to microsegment our networks. Let's get a handle on identity and try to evolve these things over time without a rip and replace on the underlay network. That's a crucial thing. And then I'd like to say one thing on culture. Andrew nailed this, right? These things were designed, OT networks were designed in isolation. SCADA networks were never intended to face the business agility and modernization problems that they're facing. But that cultural IT-OT convergence divide has to start to be eroded, right? And one way we can do that is by starting with, hey, look, no open inbound ports. That'll get you pretty far in a conversation, believe it or not, with OT and IT in terms of evolving that relationship. So hopefully that's a little bit of context.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. So Andrew, we've just been describing here these hybrid dynamic environments. Do you have any more data you'd like to share? What percentage of breaches across these hybrid environments? What have we seen? How is this happening, and is it happening at a higher rate because these hybrid dynamic environments exist?
Yeah, and when we're talking about hybrid environments, really what's important to understand here is, your OT data, it moves between your on-prem, your cloud, and your edge devices. And each layer has a different risk associated to this. And this is why a lot of the perimeters fail. So you're looking at about a 40% of the breaches, they involve data spread across these hybrid environments. And so, this is why they're failing. And so at the end of the day, what we're looking for here, and I'm going to kind of touch on that cultural divide here, we need to know that IT and OT, they speak different languages, right? And so as we go through this, we want to make sure that we all have the same goals going through our organizations, something like uptime, safety, integrity. And this is how we start protecting each layer, each environment, and we stop this at the edge. We want this cross-functional governance and all these playbooks to be in real time. But we want progress through these shared goals. And this is how we do this. We want to avoid ripping and replace. We want to do what's called modernization in place with things like zero trust overlays, zero trust in practice, secure these gateways. This is how you stop this at these hybrid environments.
Thank you. Yeah, so we've been kind of hinting at this convergence of IT and OT. And it's something that every show that I get to go to, or every talk that I'm have a chance to listen into, it does feel like we are moving away from this mindset of just have a complete operation totally off the internet and that was safe. That we don't hear too much about that anymore. I think people are understanding that if you can get inside, we have to go that next layer down from a security standpoint. And we have a lot of knowledge that we have developed in the IT side of the house that is now making its way into the OT environments. And we have, IT, identity access management. So PKI, which is, again, what Keyfactor does, issuing unique digital identities to all of these pieces so that they can securely create TLS connections and then share data and information. That's something that we've been doing in the enterprise for decades. It's well established. It is the foundation of zero trust. So we're taking, CISOs, CIOs are taking best practices that they've been doing and taking their people that have been sitting on that side of the house and then bringing them over to both IoT design and development and secure by design, and then also OT and secure operations. So definitely this is real, and I think, taking what we know has worked, but then also making the assumption and making the statements that OT devices are not just standard enterprise devices. And we have to understand that there's different risks associated, which we've kind of hinted at. There's uptime requirements, and there's much more of a business impact to some of these, especially if a factory goes down for weeks at a time. I know there was a manufacturer out of the UK recently that had this happen to them. Factory was down, and then just the ripple effects of all of their suppliers that also had basically halted because they no longer needed to supply components. So this is not just something that impacts one company. There's the whole supply chain that can be impacted. So maybe a little bit more, just looking at time here, we've got about 10 to 12 minutes. Mike, can you add anything else to this bit about best practices from the IT side that are making their way into OT cybersecurity? And anything else to add?
Yeah. So first of all, absolutely. So we need, if you look at what you can reasonably implement, right, and start to take advantage of, right. First thing is, it starts with identity, right? If you look at the difficulty in microsegmentation, for example, just take that one problem. If you attempt to build, let's call them microperimeters within your organization based upon IP addresses and essentially firewall rules, right? I would argue that by the time you're done building a microperimeter, let alone 20 or 100, your business has probably moved on. Your business may have already changed. So if you take an identity-centric approach, an identity-first approach to that problem, you're really abstracting the underlay out of the equation such that you can reorganize your business at will, right? But you have to have that identity and authentication first approach to this, right? It has to be borderless, right? Your microsegmentation has to employ least privileged access, and it has to encompass your B2B chain, right? All of your consultants that might be logging into systems to do over-the-air software update, for example, right? Mm-hmm. So, using like the Zentry environment, we could spin up a overlay network. We could spin it up for 1 hour. We could have the consultant authorized to access a unique machine for the next hour, and then we can automatically delete it. So it's no more of this managing and whitelisting, blacklisting, kind of rule-based model, right? It's documented, right? It's automated and documented in that sense. Additionally, the network itself, we have to recognize that it needs to be able to be optimized, right? The Zentry product can be deployed in cloud, it can be deployed hybrid, it can be deployed completely on premise. But just this week, right, we had Amazon with a major outage on the East Coast, right? Mm-hmm. Significant commercial websites, et cetera, affected. Well, why is that? right? Well, if you have point-to-point, network mentality, you you just lost part of your network, right? In that model. Whereas if you have a more of a mesh network mentality where we have controllers in different regions, we can even have controllers in different, network controllers I'm talking about in different cloud providers, it becomes a don't care, right? And then lastly, when you look at some of the significant kind of data breach or CVEs that have been reported, I mean, the most popular MCP server on the planet, Anthropic's, had a significant flaw in its system, right? Where an IP address was exposed, right? Well, if you had a dark network, just think about the difference. First of all, yes, you still have the problem in your system, but you now have the, I don't want to say luxury, but you now have the latitude to repair that CVE, to patch it at your leisure, because your systems are not exposed to these malicious actors, right? So that's a critical aspect of this. And then there are some of the basics, right? End-to-end encryption with mutual TLS, agentless or just-in-time solutions for being able to deploy things so you can manage that business agility. Mm-hmm. So hopefully I gave a little context to some of the IT/OT type conversation and how products like Zentry and the ES1000 and NetFoundry Keyfactor can help in bridging some of the obstacles that these organizations face in modernization.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. So I'm going to jump to one more poll question. Okay. So take a look at your screen here. Question is, and by the way, no webinar can be complete these days without mentioning AI. So what is the percentage of critical infrastructure organizations that are actually leveraging AI in some capacity? So think about energy, utilities, transportation, and water. What percentage of organizations are using this? What do you think? While you're answering that, just some examples that I've seen, right? So in the energy and utility space, people use AI. I'm not going to tell you the percentage, but things like predictive maintenance, optimizing the grid, forecasting demand, right? So all those are very important to have insights and AI around. In the transportation vertical, for traffic management, for logistics, for tracking things, tracing things, and autonomous systems. And then a third one being water, wastewater management, just things like leak detection, monitoring quality of water. So all of these are real value that companies are looking to help optimize their operations. How can they maybe have some of that be done leveraging AI? So let's see what you all said. Pretty well split. So nobody voted for 75% bring on the bots. Okay, I do agree. I don't think we're there yet. Although, again, if you read the media, it seems like everyone's going to lose their jobs and AI is going to take over the world. But about half of you said that it's 20 to 49%, which is actually correct. So 48% overall is the answer. 48% of organizations are leveraging AI in some capacity. So again, I think that's a good thing. I think as cybersecurity leaders, though, you should be aware of your people, your engineers, your factory personnel, your operation personnel trying to use AI because it is available. But have policies around it, have governance around it, be able to track and manage and help give advice and start from the top and have a corporate plan around it. So I think that's my message on this one. It is an emerging trend. It's getting more pervasive and it's at multiple layers. It's being used to design and develop code for writing software and firmware, to do code reviews and things like that. So people are already using this in the sales and go-to-market side. So I could go on and on. The point is, if you're not yet aware, you should be aware. Let's start getting some visibility into this because it's just another potential, entry point in when you have these agents and these different identities that are, being allowed to do things. Okay, so 5 minutes left. I do want to, let's talk maybe about a customer use case. So Mike, just given the timing, and I do want to have a quick wrap up at the end, maybe you can kind of summarize this, but we had talked earlier about, an oil and gas example with, several different wellheads and, securing that remotely. So can you just talk through a real life use case from your perspective in the critical industry space?
Sure. Okay, so when we look at something like, I'm going to use a generic term here, any oil and gas company, you might have a problem such as leak detection, right? It's a major problem in the industry. It causes tens of millions of dollars of lost revenue, costs in the industry. How are we going to attack that problem? AI inferencing at the edge with cameras is one thing that could be used, right? A device like the Zentry device here could be deployed. Cameras could be deployed. We can build an overlay network for that specific purpose. And we can have a use case that can be fielded, brought to market, validated, and deployed in weeks versus what normally might be a year or longer, right? So that's just a singular example. So if you look at this kind of inferencing problem we have in the industry, whether we're talking about a machine failure in a manufacturing site or a leak in an oil field, those are the kinds of use cases and business problems that the three companies here on the phone have come together to try to attack. So, Ellen, I don't know if that provides enough detail, but hopefully that gives people a little bit of food for thought on, how they might approach finding. And I also think that's an isolated enough example that you can make progress. Whatever your own personal definition of zero trust is, because it's been overused, you need to think about, well, what's practical, right? Can we solve a problem that moves the needle for the business? So with the example that I just gave you, we can attack a singular problem that has, a value engineering outcome of tens of millions of dollars. And yet we still don't have to talk about a complete rip and replace of your existing infrastructure. All of that can be deployed with a private 5G network, with some ruggedized edge compute technology, a couple cloud connections and cameras, right? It can be done, it can be studied, you can prove it, you can show it to management, and you can make progress, right? I think that's kind of the more pragmatic approach that you might want to have in addressing these problems.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, and it's starting small too. It's, you don't have to solve all the world's problems at once, but start with the most important and test it out. Okay, so I would like to have each of you just give a final thought to the audience. So Andrew, I'll start with you. If there's maybe one takeaway that you would like to give to the crowd based on today's talk, what would you leave them with?
Yeah, I think if I was going to say one thing to take away, it's that OT modernization and security, they don't have to be at odds. We can enable digital transformation, connecting more assets. We can adopt things such as AI. We can scale operations, all without increasing risks. What we need to do is, as your networks evolve, especially with things like AI, the edge, and automation, and they start taking hold, think secure by design, not bolt on after the fact. Okay, this is how we start protecting critical operations as they move all the industries forward. And we can do this without ripping and replacing, very easy and at scale.
Awesome. Thank you. And Mike, closing thought from you.
Yeah, I would tell the audience to look at their hardest networking problems, right? There are gaps in your business wherever it is. Look at your hardest networking problem and consider, what we talked about today and let us have a conversation about that. I think we can make real progress with the agility of the solution that's been brought here together. And, in general, I would leave you with that thought.
Thank you, Mike. And wrapping it up on my side, my advice would be discover and understand all of the connected pieces that are within your environment and get them under management. And then make sure that those systems, those devices, those applications have credentials that certain people are allowed to access them, and that if you have secure data that needs to be secured, create a TLS connection and a secure channel by which to communicate to these things. And that's a start. That's easy things to do. And then sign firmware, and don't upload code to a machine if you haven't validated the origin of it and the authenticity of it, and that it's code that either your vendor has written and you trust, or it's something that you have written and your developers have put on there. So some of these basic things that is a great way to start. So with that, I do want to say, take a look at the attachments section here in the system. You will see several great pieces of content. I'm going to put back our names again here. So feel free to reach out to any of us from our companies. We are happy to have further discussions with you. And with that, I just want to thank everyone for your attention, for your participation, and then also Mike and Andrew for your expert comments in today's session. I really appreciate it, and the open dialogue. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.